You're joining Conversations with the Corporate Mystic, hosted by Stephanie Crain, a podcast for leaders and change makers navigating complexity in business and culture. Let's dive in. My guest today is Maria Nolan, founder of SeeChange Consulting and a strategic advisor with a background that spans primary education, government, agriculture, and corporate consulting. Maria works with leadership teams to close the gap between strategy and execution. And she's not doing so by adding more process. Maria is building the clarity, alignment, and thinking quality that makes execution possible in the first place. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephanie. Such a privilege, really, to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to have a conversation with you, what I think is going to be about conversations. But maybe I think more. But this will be fun. And I've got a question ready for you to sort of launch our conversation. And this is something, you've said that execution ultimately depends on the quality of the thinking behind it, right? So that's where I want to start. I want to start in that space. In your experience, when that thinking is breaking down inside of a team, what's really happening in the room? What's happening when the quality of thinking starts to erode?
That's a great question. The immediate thing that comes to mind is what's happening is the room becomes less safe. It feels less safe. So what I often see is sometimes there's defensiveness, which then creates fear. Well, it is driven by fear, but it creates fear in others just by the reaction that people are getting. And then I see unproductive discussions. They're not conversations. There's dominance, and then there's people retracting.
What's an unproductive discussion sound like? Like, give me an example of what's happening in an unproductive discussion.
Yeah, an unproductive discussion is where it's not equal, that people aren't really listening to what the other person's saying. We're more in defending our point of view rather than listening for connection and listening for similarity and listening to build on each other's ideas. And it's unproductive, I think, mainly, Stephanie, because at the end of the day, there's no clear, useful, beneficial result of that discussion. And I don't call it a conversation. It's not a conversation.
It's like talking in a circle, right? It's like
Correct.
You get all the way to the end point and you're all still angry and nothing's been done.
Yes. And I think to your point, and it's unproductive because it's damaging. Also, because you're not in the same place you were when you started. You're actually worse off.
That makes really sense, because there's going to be a shift, and if you haven't made progress,
Yes.
that you really are diminishing even in that state, because now you're probably trusting each other less. You're probably like forming more biases, getting more, and you go home and you take all that with you, and you come back like ready,
ready to fight again.
Yeah, that's what I envision. It's like still that progress is a hindrance, and that makes sense. I feel like, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of those types of conversations happening in corporate spaces, and really even in other environments as well. Like, people just don't seem to be listening to each other. Right? They seem to want to be validated almost, as opposed to trying to solve a problem.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it happens everywhere. I think it happens in families, in homes, it's everywhere. And I often talk about having a teaching background is when do we teach people how to have conversations? Because often when I look at a conversation or I watch one, I go, why would you think that that's a good way to do that? And it's like, but they don't know any better. This is how they've been raised, or this is what they've always done. They know sometimes it doesn't work and often doesn't work, but they don't know how to do it any differently.
So how are when you're in a situation like that, working with a group of people who fundamentally aren't listening to each other, but maybe not because they don't want to, right? Maybe because they just simply don't know how. Like, how do you get them to even listen to you, right? Like, how do you get it? How do you like get their attention, so to speak, enough to start looking at their own sort of behavior in a situation like that, or to how do you start to address the shift?
I think, Stephanie, when I'm working with people, I know this is a common problem. So even before we get into whatever we're trying to figure out, I like to start with some, I guess, setting the mindset. And I often do an activity, you would have seen it, where there's an image and it can be seen two ways, depending on how you look at it. And before we even start, we look at this image, we ask each other what we see. And I'm very deliberate, probably from my primary teaching background, but I literally say that you're going to speak in pairs. You're going to speak for a minute about what you see, and the other person's going to listen and ask you clarifying questions so that they can understand totally what you see.
I have to interrupt you, Maria, because I can't. I don't want to be reductive, but nothing really truly warms my heart more than somebody with a primary education working with executive leaders. Okay, so just I love everybody. Okay, like I just am so
Yes,
happy that when you say that, it makes me literally I giggle. Okay, so and I couldn't stop giggling, so I had to interrupt you and say.
yes,
So
no, that is
please,
fine.
please go on with the exercise because what you were
Yeah,
saying.
so it's as simple as, you speak for a minute and the other person asks questions. So I often talk about how usually it's like, "Oh, I saw this," and the other person will jump in and go, "Oh no, but I saw this." And that's the problem, right? We don't sit and listen to the person who's seen whatever they've seen and respect that they've seen that. And then we swap over. And then when we come back together, we talk about, was there an argument? Was it tense? No. Did you enjoy it? Yes, it was fascinating to hear what the other person thought. So I like to start with that because then that sets the scene. And then within the workshops that I'm running or the interactions, I just go very gently at times, are we seeing the same thing? Are we listening to each other? Are we actually being curious, or are we defending and judging?
It's interesting that when you talk about the exercise, and immediately imagine the meme of the cartoon of the letter, or I'm sorry, the number 9 6. Somebody on each side is seeing obviously, and it's like they're both right, and then they're both wrong, but
Correct.
they're both right, right? And so it's like, and the logical thing is in that image where there's one person standing on each side. The logical thing is sort of like, well, come around and see it from my point of view, like because that can physically happen in that situation. You can physically walk over and go, "Oh, you do see a 9." And look, I do see. But it's
Yes.
not always that obvious, right? Like in people
Yeah.
situations, like sometimes it's a
Yes.
lot more nuanced about the perspective. So, how do you get people to sort of lean into the nuances and get curious about what the other person sees?
Well, and I think you're absolutely correct. Once you start to put it into real life where they're talking about a strategy or they're talking about how we're going to execute it, then that's when people's, shackles come up because they own some of that then. So it is that gentle, let's just pause. And I often talk about the helicopter view, let's just stop and look at what's going on here. And something you just said there resonated with me as well, Stephanie, is often I'll get them to sit side by side or to sit across from each other, whatever's relevant for the activity that we're doing. Like, and I often talk about how if you've got something hard to talk about, if you've ever had a teenage child, you put them in the car and you drive because you don't want to have the eye contact because it's difficult.
Can
Whereas
keep the
other
feelings
times, I
kind of like
think
neatly in their
even the
spot.
way, yeah, and even the way people are seated sometimes is doesn't enhance curiosity or conversation or genuine um, interest.
I think that that's a really good point, especially in the context of just like organizational room, power dynamics, and sometimes being across from each other, you're automatically kind of creating the divide.
Yes.
sometimes it can feel like a bridge, right? But it really depends
Yes.
a little bit on the culture and the space you're in. And back to what you opened with at the very beginning, just how safe you feel, right?
Yes.
Like, are you
Yes.
sitting on the side of a wall, or are you sitting on the edge of a bridge that you can walk
Yes.
forward? And I think that's an interesting way to think about that. And if you're sitting side by side, there's even more of a peer aspect there, where
Yes.
it's almost collaborative. Like when I think of people
Collaborative.
sitting side by side, I think shoulders hunched over together, working on something together. Like in that, it's a very visual, like visceral kind of a visual. I think to think of it that way. So I like
And I
that.
think, Stephanie, you've made me think too about why do we get defensive and why do those conversations get derailed? And I was thinking just then, it's because often we don't get validated for what we think. We're very combative at the moment, particularly about, I'm right, you're wrong, sort of black white type of thinking. And you will like this technique I use, and I started it a long time ago. In my classrooms, I used to give out gold stars for good thinking. And now I give out gold stars in my work. And, my people have said to me, oh, that's ridiculous. They go, that's ridiculous, Maria. That'll never work. Like, people already think you're crazy because you're a primary teacher who's tried to become an adult and, that type of thing. And oh my gosh, Stephanie, it just tells me people just want to be heard. They want somebody to say, I get it. I don't have to, I think that's the other thing. I don't have to agree with you. I don't, no one's telling me that I have to agree. But the funny thing happens is if I actually listen to you, I do at times start to think about what I think. So it still has influence on me.
I believe that. And I think that is essential in the context of, it's been said so, and we even said it in this call, most people are listening to respond, right?
Yes,
But that sense of validation of just simply saying, okay, this is what I just heard you say to me, just in that very simple way of engagement. And even
yes,
when you are repeating, at least when I do this, because I do that all the time. And especially one reason, because I speak to people all over the world from lots of different cultures, and I am isolated in Texas, and that you can have a lot of biased opinions about what that might mean. And so I want to make sure I understand the people I'm speaking with, like not just from a
yes.
perspective of but like different cultural, like terms and things like that. So I'm always repeating things back to people, just for clarity, just for simple clarity. And when I say it out loud, then I have more clarity in the process. Like I'm
Yes.
gaining the clarity as I'm speaking it. So I'm not just like validating for the sake of validation. I'm also doing it for the sake of my own clarification. Like, did I really understand what you said? And please tell me if I didn't, right? Like, please let me know.
And I think that even that act helps. If you said that to me, that helps me clarify my thinking. Because if you go, is this what you said? And I go, oh God, no. I might have said that, but I didn't mean that. Um, and I'm an extrovert, so that happens regularly. It's like, oh, did I say that? Oh, no, 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 that's not what I meant. So it's a two-way beneficial result, right?
I think that's interesting actually, because now that I'm thinking about it, I have, even though we're talking about using that, for, clarity and understanding, but I've seen people do that with people who sometimes might say something really, and I've actually done it with people who they say something that's maybe kind of rude or offensive, and just simply going, wait, let me just clarify what you did. Did you just say that I okay, that's what and it puts it back to them in a particular way where, again, you're not really escalating. It's validation, it's clarification,
Yes,
but it's
yes,
also reflection. And that's what
yes,
you're describing. There's some reflection there that's happening too. And somebody has an opportunity to go, okay, maybe I said that, but I didn't mean to say it that way. Or, something that gives them the space to shift
yes,
the dynamic of the conversation, which keeps people from just living in this rigid space of
yes,
right or wrong, this or that, you or me, right? Like us or them,
yes,
whatever that is.
yes,
So I think some
yes,
of it is like that, giving people permission just by allowing yourself to process. Like I think that's part of
correct.
it, right? Like it creates space and time.
Yeah, and I was just thinking the same thing because I started, then my mind went to, well, why don't we do this like regularly or every time we have a conversation? And when I ask my clients about that, the usual suspect is time. Oh, we don't have time. We've got this 1 hour meeting and we've got to make this decision in this time. And then I'm always I don't know, the protagonist who goes, uh, what would happen if we didn't make that decision in the next hour? And I often say, we're not in an emergency room in a hospital with somebody who's just about to, you know, not be with us anymore. Like let's just put this into perspective, what we're trying to do here. And if we just take another hour and get a better result, we'll make a better decision and we'll get a better result, and then we'll save time anyway.
I'm going to share something with you, and my audience is going to feel like I'm just repeating myself, which y'all, I do. I repeat myself, so it's okay. But I just in another episode said this, and it's so poignant to what you just said. I don't use the word deadline in creative spaces because nobody dies, right?
Yes.
When a project doesn't get launched. I use the word lifeline, and I talk about when are we bringing this project to life? And I really
Yeah.
try to infuse it from that space of it takes time to create life, as we well know.
Yeah.
And it's something that
Yeah.
deserves time and nurturing care and energy, right? And it's also psychologically a much healthier, joyful way to think about the work you're doing, than to
Yeah.
be working against a deadline, right? Is such a brutal, and there are people who actually do have to do that. So I also
Yeah.
feel like it really diminishes the people who really do have deadlines, where
Yes.
lives really actually are at stake. And,
Stake. Yes.
and that's a really true, meaningful word if you're not meeting, the goal, the executing on the goal. And so I really look at language like that a lot because I think it affects how we communicate with each other when we're always speaking in these very kind of like negative terms around things that should functionally be collaborative, communal, like relational things.
Yeah, and Stephanie, one of my key aspects of my work is to have fun. Exactly what you're saying. It should be fun. It should be energizing. Like, my dream, I say to clients all the time, is that, every time we have this regular meeting, you can't wait to come. You can't wait to be there. And when you leave, you're like, oh, that was so good. Look at what we got done. Like, look at what we found out. Look at what new thinking we've got. And I'm yet to experience that totally, but sure, when people leave my workshops, there's got some levity. There's some lightness, and I love what you're saying. Yeah, it's about bringing it to life.
Your workshops are creating the space for people to learn that skill again because
Yes.
what was such a critical life development skill for us as children is literally no less critical.
I
It's like
actually I think more so even. I think more
I
so because there's so many. It's just multiplied right now. There might have been I'm not saying my era was perfect at it, but certainly, with technology now, and they're saying now kids, like I see younger people, they don't know how to have a conversation. Even it's not even a bad one. They don't know how. Like my stepson, we're teaching him how to ask questions at the moment because, okay, he's nearly 17, and I know that adolescents go through that phase where they don't want to talk. But, my partner Tony was saying to me yesterday, he goes, oh, he just says nothing. And I'm saying, ask me a question, mate. Like, ask me something. And he goes, I don't know what to ask you, Dad. Like, he literally, and I said, so we've got to help him. We've got to say, well, ask me about my day. Ask me how I'm feeling. Ask me about, so it's really a big issue. It's getting bigger and bigger because people are losing the skill. And then as you said, it's relational. How do I have a relationship if I can't have a really good conversation?
Yeah, especially if you're trying to build an environment or a culture around trust and collaboration or
Yes,
innovation or any of these
yes,
things that may be required in your work at all times.
yes,
You're right. I do think it's really cyclical. I think it's cyclical on multiple levels in the way that we have just both. gotten more distanced from ourselves, and we
Yes.
can talk about like how, COVID impacted that in certain ways, but in some ways, when I look at, for me, like COVID, I was certainly, I live on a farm, so I'm already distanced from people. And during the time of COVID, I actually talked to more people across the world than I had at any other point in my life, like,
Yes.
and so it was
Yes.
like, I don't know, am I more or less connected right now? It's kind of uncertain. And
Yes.
so there was
Yeah.
a weird dichotomy of what digital connection and conversations were doing to us versus
Yes.
in-person connections and conversations, which I know a lot of people are craving now, a lot
100%.
more in
Yes.
person, like, so yeah, I think that's important. We did, in a previous life, on a previous podcast, we did uh, a Generation Jeopardy game set. And part of that game set was we interviewed about 20 or 30 different people from different generations. And we had the five same questions that we asked all of them. And it was like, what's something nostalgic that you remember? What's a key event that you remember, that shaped your life? Things like that. They're really interesting, powerful questions. But one of our key questions was, how does your generation communicate with each other? And so we were talking to boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. This was our target group. One of the things that we found that was really interesting was Gen X and millennials were way, way more digital, and Gen Z was actually, and Gen Alpha downward was actually, they were describing themselves as becoming more analog and getting off of like social media
Yes.
platforms and getting not being available 24 hours a day, like they
Yes.
would see their parents responding to texts and things. And I think that made me hopeful that they were actually communing and maybe talking to each other in person.
Yes. 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 Well, it's, you said before it's cyclical, right?
It is, and things
Yeah.
those they do come around, right? Like in that sense of, who knows? Maybe like whatever's after Gen Alpha will be writing in cursive again, or they'll probably come up with their own form of like language that.
Well, even here last night on the news, I was laughing to myself because they said that kids have lost a lot of their gross motor skills. And I thought, well, of course, because they're not out running around and we protect them so much. So they've introduced a new term called risky play.
Risky play, which is what
Risky
we
play.
just did as kids. Is that what we just did as kids?
Yep. They said, oh, why don't you get, some things outside in your yard where, get a ladder or get and put it across a plank and climb and balance and run. And
So I
wow.
have my own thoughts on this, and I actually do formal scheduled play dates,
Yeah.
and they're structured and they're quite fun. And I do them digitally online, and but I'm curious when you're with a room of executives, right? And especially, let's say like before they've gotten used to you, like before this is maybe the first or second time, okay, and you're really trying to get them to just start to loosen up, just start to engage a little bit in that play space, right? What are the things that actually really get their attention, or what are the things that really let them do that the most?
Yeah, I love it. Firstly, I tell them that they don't have to do anything that they don't want to do, which is, ends up being very useful because I'm not going to force you, but then because I don't force you, then you feel like you can. On my tables, I have toys, lots of toys that are like squishy and things so that people automatically go, this is different, this is fun, different types of pens, there's crayons, there's all sorts of things. And so early on, it seems very relaxed. This is a relaxed, safe space. And then I have what I do call my ground rules, which is things like listen to hear, not to reply. Mobiles off. And, people say to me all the time, oh, so and so, Maria, if you say that, they'll be very offended. And no, it's just because nobody's ever said that's in this space, this is not the place.
That's my experience too, actually, is I say things
Yeah,
all the time and people just hear it.
yeah,
They don't get angry at all.
exactly. Because you say it's because it's about respect, and how would you feel if somebody's on a phone when you're trying to have a conversation with them and they go, oh, I don't like that. Okay, well, we won't do that here. But yeah, so, and I think it's just the nature. I've done a lot of work in creating safe spaces for people. So it doesn't take that long. You let people ease into it. You don't do too much tough stuff. You get them talking about themselves, is
Aren't they
what I
kind of craving
often
it?
do.
Aren't
Yeah.
they? I mean, they're craving it,
Because they want
right?
people to
Like,
be interested. They go, oh, don't stand up and say, I'm Maria and I'm from Australia and I do this. And it's like, no, well, don't stand up and do it, but have a chat.
I participate with a group that I adore. I'll shout them out. Weird ones, they'll know exactly who I'm talking about. And we hold a monthly bragging session, and the whole purpose is to literally anybody can come. It's wide open. I am one of the co-hosts and a professional bragger. I'm sure
Yes.
nobody would like totally believe that, but and like the goal though, because people are so conditioned not to really amplify themselves. It's like I find a lot of people can sometimes really amplify someone else, but then you
Yes.
ask them to start talking about
Yes.
themselves and they just like shut down. There's nothing about me. There's whatever, and that's not special. That's just and it's
Yeah.
like so the goal of that is to really teach people how to brag in a way that they're really amplifying aspects and sharing themselves is really what it's like we use the word brag because it has such a cultural distaste
Yes.
for it, but people are conditioned, and that when you won't share about yourself, well then you're also not going to share your ideas, and you're also not going to collaborate. You're going to be afraid to be wrong, all of these things. Like if you can't share literally the most basic aspects of who you are in that way, then it stops so many other things. So I think
And I
that's
think, Stephanie, it's a great point. I just had a coffee with a colleague yesterday and we were talking about, I do a lot of work in the agriculture space, having grown up on a farm as well. And we call it here the tall poppy syndrome. And I was telling
what's
her some of the
that.
amazing results that I'm getting with a client currently. And she goes, oh, well, you two need to go to places and talk about that. This is amazing, and talk about why and how you could achieve this, and through the engagement of people and collaboration. And I said that I don't think, like, it's the bragging, right? It's like you're not going to get this CEO of a big agricultural company to stand in front of his peers and talk about how well they're doing.
Yeah,
And that is a
it's
travesty. Like
it.
that is
It's really it's unfortunate because it truly is something that energizes people. Don't I think there's a difference between what I would call, and this is kind of a like kind of boasting or being obnoxious or
yes.
being like,
Yes.
but this ideal of just like, hey, I did something really good and I'm really proud of it, and
Yes.
and I want to share it with you because I think that you would appreciate just knowing about it, right? Just knowing about it, and then maybe after I tell you that, you'll tell me something really cool that you did too, and then look what we
That's so
both
true.
like. That to me is like really a shared like alchemical moment where people can expand off that energy, and I don't know
Yeah.
why
And,
they don't.
as I know, and as a teacher, my point too is if I share that this worked for me, you could do it too. It's like don't reinvent the wheel. If you do X plus Y, that will get Z
Yes.
on, 90% of the time. So here's the formula. You have a go because you don't have to figure this out. It's that shared, I have a learning. I'm just fascinated with learning and how important it is. That's learning from each other. You don't have to come up with all the ideas. There's other people who've got ideas that you can use. But as you say, it's just that feel good of. But I think there's a lot of, and this is the defensiveness. There's jealousy. I don't want to celebrate someone else's win because celebrating then makes me feel worse.
But you know what? That's like really at the core of like when you don't, for example, have empathy for yourself, you're not going to have empathy for
Yes.
someone else, right? So
Yes.
if you don't celebrate your own joy,
Yes.
you're going to project that onto the people around you. And so that's where
Yes.
that jealousy grows from is you're jealous of yourself because
Yes.
you're not honoring your own energy in that way, right? And it's
Yes.
not about that they're doing this and you're not. It's what you're not recognizing what you are doing. That's the key. It's like
Yes.
diminishing
Yes.
what you are
Yes.
actually bringing. It's not about doing the same things. It's about recognizing that your value is just as valuable but maybe different. And that is totally
Oh,
okay, right? Like,
you just am a member of a fitness sort of health club. It's just a thing I'm on, and they keep saying comparison is the thief of joy.
it is.
And there was even a post this morning where someone's lifting, 20 kilos, and they've said, don't look at how much she's lifting. Look at the fact that, like, if you're 20, she's 20 and you're 5, it's not what it's about. She's just further along in her journey.
Look at the fact that you're actually present and here
Yeah,
and
yeah,
doing it, that you can lift
yeah.
anything, that you can do any,
Anything.
like in that space
Yeah.
of, yeah, that's, it is now it's like we have like wrapped our conversation in this beautiful like loop, but not a circle. It's more like a beautiful spiral where we have gone from like listening to hear all the way to like actually finding joy in the
Yes.
experiences that you're in, right? And that
Yeah.
can happen, believe it or not. I know most people are going to be like, ah! That can happen in your business. That can happen in corporate spaces. You can experience those types of things. It's very possible, but it takes work. I mean,
Exactly.
especially if you haven't been doing it already, it takes some work.
Yes. And I think, and you make me think, it's about the joy, and it's a lot of my work has been driven by seeing people burnt out
Yeah,
and treated badly, and in the process of trying to execute a strategy, it's actually killing people,
it
which is your
is.
thinking around deadlines. It's the
Yeah,
thinking around has to, pressure, what happens if we don't, instead of what happens if we do, what happens if um so that's a real foundation for me. The fun, I call it the fun, but it's the joy, and you're never going to learn as much if you're not in that state, so
I agree
therefore you're
with you.
never going to apply that.
Well, I mean, that again, we know just by learning from children, because that's when they're
Yes,
absorbing and learning the most,
yes,
is when they're in play and when they're in play
yes.
state. So I think this has been a really beautiful and fascinating conversation. This conversation has brought me joy.
Me too, Stephanie. So we've achieved it with ourselves.
I know. See, we are literally proof
Living,
of
breathing. Yes.
yes, we're living, breathing proof. So, Maria, I always like to leave our guests with sort of takeaways, and then I also have like a couple of audience reflection questions that I'll ask. But do you have any key takeaways from the conversation that really piped up for you that you want the audience to consider?
I think it's remembering that, and I'm a process oriented person, so conversation is a process, is don't always be worried about the destination, worry about the consistent processes that we're using that get us there. And it's the 1%, just like you said, it's turning up, it's being there, it's having a go. We say having a go. If we retract and we go into ourselves, human beings, we're relational creatures, we need each other. So I think that's the thing I want people to remember. And you said it's hard, but keep going,
Yeah,
keep trying to do
it's
that.
it's hard, but like it's a worthy
Worth
investment.
of it.
I
Yes.
mean, and it'll, the thing that I want the audience to consider, because we talked about leadership, we talked about business conversations, but really we talked about people talking to people. And whether you're learning this in your professional business, whether you're learning this in your personal life, it affects every aspect of your world. You will become a better conversationalist. You will become a better listener. You will become more capable of being both empathetic and intellectual in the same space. The more that you allow yourself to practice conversational skills and just again be in that space of listening, learning, curiosity, and play. Like, it gives you so much opportunity and so many possibilities in that space. Like, that's my favorite space.
Yeah, and I think when you've got a problem, because there's a lot of problems, and when you're executing strategy, there's a lot of problems, you'll find the answer. Because the worst feeling is, I don't know the answer. We're stuck. We're never going to fix this. This will continue to be a problem. What you're saying is we will find there's always a solution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I do. I think I'm glad that you brought that up and because, you know, we are out there solving hard problems. We are out there working with complex things that are complicated, and our lives that we're bringing with us into those situations add to all of that complexity. And so if we can center some of these concepts so that they don't get forgotten, and I think that that's the key thing. As you rightfully pointed out, we're moving so fast through some of these decisions and through some of these strategies and the pressure to do that, that it's pretty easy to forget some of these very foundational elements that will actually make that process really go faster. Because what's going to happen is you'll do it better early, and you won't have to go back and fix all of the things that you missed during the anxiety and chaos. And
isn't that the irony though?
Is this the irony?
I often say go slow to go fast.
Go slow to go fast. Oh, let's end on go slow to go fast. Okay, audience, I have a couple of reflection questions. And because our conversation was so rich and awesome, I have no idea if the questions are even going to, let's find out. Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, so in your last leadership meeting, was there something someone didn't say? And do you know why? Think about that. Not what you didn't say, but are you aware that someone else didn't speak up? And do you know why they didn't speak up? And here's another question. This is very corporate mysticky. What part of yourself have you put in the shadow to survive your leadership culture? And what would it cost you to bring it back out? So, nothing provocative or heavy there, y'all, okay? But as always, thank you so much for joining us, Maria. If you could take a moment before we close and let people know how they can find you, or how you work with people, anything you want the audience to be aware of, that would be great.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so my whole mission is to solve the problem of the disconnect between strategy and execution. So if you find yourself in a situation where you don't know how do we get from A to B to C to D and get your people engaged and get them talking and conversing and get their ideas, then I definitely would love to help with that. And it's just SeeChange Consulting. It's SEE, not SEA. In Australia, SEA change means you sell holidays and beach events. I don't do that, sorry. But it is about you when
see like vision. See like vision.
See like vision. And you see the change. You don't just talk about it and say it could be. You actually see it happen in front of you. And that's the value of my work, is it does change. Things change, things get better, things get clearer, and people are happier, which is the end result.
I can't imagine people spending time with you and not being happier, Maria. So, I mean, I feel happier today, so.
Well, me, same to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. And audience, thank you as well. Thank you for being here and sharing this space with us today. If this conversation sparked something for you, don't let it stop there. Reflect on it, engage with it, and if it feels right, share it forward. You can follow, subscribe, or pass this along to someone who's looking for a different kind of leadership conversation. Conversations with the Corporate Mystic can be found on YouTube and can be heard anywhere that podcasts are played. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep leading from within.